So, we're definitely...
That's the cue. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Good afternoon. It's lovely to have an intimate gathering like this, as only Davos can deliver. Let me not be rude and introduce my panel first, so that you know who is sitting before you. Immediately to my left, Princess Haifa Bint Mohammed Al Saud, who is the Assistant Minister for Strategy and Executive Affairs at the Ministry of Tourism of Saudi Arabia. Sitting next to the Princess is Anthony Capuano, Chief Executive Officer of Marriott International, USA. Is it Marriott International? Right, yeah. And then to his left is... there we go. To his left is Minister Iswaran, who's the Minister of Transport and Minister in charge of Trade Relations in Singapore. To his left there is Ruzwana Bashir, the founder and chief executive of Peak.com USA, and also a World Economic Forum young global leader. And then immediately to her left is the President of the Dominican Republic, President Corona, who will deliver some remarks towards the end of the session about what he's heard and reflect on some of the lessons that we are learning. So, globalization. Do you remember that? The good old days, those halcyon days for tourism, when everything was almost on autopilot. Then came COVID, and the tourism industry faced that challenge, but it was a real challenge. And just as the industry was beginning to haul itself out of those difficulties, then came war in Europe, with multiple air routes cancelled and potentially huge economic storm clouds in the future. One view is that this is a moment to pause and reflect and think about what changes we could make to the tourism industry, how to face the issues of overcrowding, the environment, how to treat the tourism industry's workers better. Another perspective is that a crisis like this is not the time to be worrying about things like that. When walls are going up around the world, the challenge is to ensure that the industry can still thrive. So let me begin, if I may, with you, Minister Iswaran. You in Singapore have seen the travel business come back strongly. What's your reflections of how things are going at this point?
Well, I think the recovery has been, if you look at it from a global point of view, it's been quite uneven. If you look at North America, Europe, and parts of the Middle East, it has probably gone back to almost pre-COVID levels. In our part of the world, because the stance has been more conservative in many of the countries, recovery is a little bit further behind. So in Singapore, we've opened up our borders. We made it very easy for travel with very minimal requirements, vaccination and so on. And we have, in the space of a few weeks, has really doubled volumes, and we are now nearly at about 50% of where we were pre-COVID. Now, that's still a long shot away from where we would like to be, but it's been a very quick recovery. And I would say from the broader perspective of aviation and tourism recovery, really we need to look at recovery, reconnection, and rejuvenation. And I mean by that recovery because we need to make sure that we ramp up and keep up with the capacity needs, because the operational needs in airports around the world have really shot up, and the systems have not been able to keep up. That's quite evident looking at the crunches in various airports. At the same time, we need to create more seamless connectivity. So leveraging digital, for example, healthcare protocols, very uneven. Can we come upon working with the health authorities, WHO, standard definition of what is fully vaccinated, what are the other requirements, if any, and then leveraging digital technologies to put in place mutual recognition. This will serve us well, not just for now, but for any future kind of incident that might occur. And then in terms of longer term rejuvenation, I think people talk about revenge travel. It's almost vengeful travel, the way people are coming back. But I would say that the most important thing here is you asked whether it's a time to pause and take stock as opposed to just recover. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, because I think we want to recover, but it's also an opportunity for us to learn from the pandemic, also incorporate sustainability kind of initiatives in our thinking for the future, as well as in terms of how we build up capacity. So we've just announced last week that we are restarting our Terminal 5 project in Singapore. But that project will incorporate important lessons. It was something we paused for a couple of years, but it really will incorporate lessons from the pandemic, learning how to make our airport operations more modular so that you can transition quickly if you need to, and of course the sustainability angle. So I think it's a time, it's not about sitting and waiting. We need to take action, but I think the action can be orientated both towards recovery, but also long-term rejuvenation of the sector.
Your Highness, Saudi Arabia has had great plans. You're kind of new on the block, if you like, when it comes to tourism. Tell us a little bit about those plans, and are you having to rethink in the face of some of the challenges that the industry now has?
So, Keir, basically, as Saudi, as you mentioned, as we were new, we have an advantage of really looking at how everything is done. And we opened up just a few months as a destination before the pandemic. So we didn't even get to really test out the different elements of tourism, but which turned out to be as a positive thing for us, because we were able to look at things from a different angle and a different aspect than more mature destinations. And we've learned a lot. And I think the first thing that we've learned is the world is calling to go back to pre-pandemic, to recover and go back. What we're saying is the one thing that we've learned is the system in itself and the sector in itself was not resilient. It could not withstand the shocks that took place. This is why the sector lost $4 trillion. 63 million jobs were lost globally. We decided to take a different view and really test out. And I think there are three core things that we have learned need to be different moving forward. First of all, domestic first. We need to focus on our local communities and put them first. This makes them more resilient when we're talking about opportunities, funding, jobs. And I'll give you an example. We have a Saudi Airbnb-style local company who had around less than 3,000 houses on their portfolio right before the pandemic hit and when we were opening up. And quickly, because we focused on them, we gave them access to insight and information. By the way, this company is also led by a Saudi woman. We focused on supporting them with insight, data, information, and also supporting them on where are we going to increase demand domestically for them to be able to properly maneuver. And what we saw is that actually that number increased to today 30,000 homes on their platform. So you're talking about a 700% increase in their expansion. So this shows you, of course, with that comes jobs, comes more investment. So that shows you how important communities are and the inclusion. Al-Ula, which is one of my favorite destinations, has done that very, very well as well in working with locals to have them take over these new jobs that are being created. The second, I think, is adaptability and agility. As we test new things, we shouldn't assume that they are right or correct. We should have the flexibility to go back, rethink, see what worked and what didn't. In policies, in framework, in using data. Data is critical. We've built a data system and we've invested heavily in our foundation of data, where we've integrated with over 10 different government entities to have a frequency of data, availability, accessibility all the time. We got insights like, okay, this destination is seeking demand locally without us even trying. So let's start packaging it, pushing people towards that direction. And we've seen a peak in spend over 200% in that destination because of this insight and the importance of data. Finally, I would say sustainability, which His Excellency mentioned. We saw what happened to our environment during the pandemic. We saw the colors of the water come back. We have some of the untouched shorelines in the Red Sea, and we want to preserve that. We need to ensure that as the tourism comes back and picks up in number, we are growing as a population in general. We need to make sure we don't have overcrowding. We secure our heritage sites, our environmental sites, and look at the full value chain of sustainability within tourism, all the way from green funding to community resilience, to the types of materials that are used on these sites, which we have implemented and is working out successfully. So I think this is, for me, these are the key three areas that are critical and important. And of course, working with stakeholders and private sector needs to become the norm. It cannot become the exception that we do to control a crisis. It needs to be the way business is done. Because we were working with our stakeholders, Marriott, for example, is doubling, more than doubling its investments in Saudi Arabia over the next few years, working on training Saudis for these jobs to become available. Around 20,000 jobs are going to become available over the next 5 years.
That's a great segue. So, Tony Capuano, I suppose you could say slightly easier if you're Saudi Arabia, and in some ways you're beginning with a blank sheet of paper. An enormous challenge if you're Marriott, dealing with legacy businesses in many cases. How's it gone, and what are you seeing change, and what needs to change?
Well, I might, after those kind words, I'm hesitant to quibble with the princess a little bit, but I will say one of the things we've found so remarkable over the last 2 years is the resilience of travel. If you look at the last two shocks to travel and tourism sector, post 9/11 and the Great Recession, it took about 5 years for the business to come back on a global basis. And in effect, we've seen global recovery, with the exception of Greater China, in a period of 2 years, which is quite remarkable. As I reflect on how the business has changed, I would tell you maybe one challenge and two opportunities that we think will endure well beyond the end of the pandemic. The challenge is really around labor. You heard the princess talk a bit about it. Some estimates suggest that 1 in 5 jobs globally that were lost during the pandemic were in the travel and tourism sector. And some of those have likely been lost permanently. I think the workforce viewed the travel and tourism sector for many decades as a safe harbor, and that confidence understandably has been shaken. So that's an area where we're going to have to be very deliberate to talk about not just the industry as a place to earn a fair wage, but an opportunity to build long-term careers. On the plus side of the ledger, I would say to you the adoption of technology. Many of us in travel and tourism developed a number of these technology platforms well before the start of the pandemic, but by necessity we've seen our guests adopt them in droves, and I think that will last beyond the end of the pandemic. And then maybe the most exciting phenomenon we've seen is this idea of blended trip purpose. Had this panel sat in the lobby of one of our hotels in 2019, we could have, as the elevator doors opened, said that's a business traveler, that's a group meeting attendee, that's a leisure traveler. That will be increasingly difficult, and we think it's great news for our business. By necessity, we've learned, even if it's not optimal, we can conduct business from anywhere. And so we see it in our day of the week booking patterns. Pre-pandemic, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, big travel nights, Friday, Saturday, leisure, and Thursday, Sunday were a bit weak because they were shoulder days. Thursday and Sunday have come back more rapidly than Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And I think it's because people are increasingly saying, rather than take a 2-day business trip, I'm going to invite my family and I'm going to turn it into a blended trip that's 5, 6, 7 nights, and I think that's going to endure for years to come.
Ruzwana, how has your business been able to tap into that? You operate a business that is experientially, that's the focus. Have you benefited from the changes that Tony's talking about? And you've also worked hard to support those businesses in these difficult times. Talk a little bit about that and what you've been able to do.
Yeah, so with Peak, we help people book experiences, things that range from water sports or going ziplining to taking an art tour or a cooking class. So we work with thousands of small businesses. And what we found is in COVID, obviously, they were pretty badly hit. People weren't doing things in person. And so there was a lot of need to help those. And I think the first thing that we were doing was obviously helping them get access to things like PPP loans and just to kind of make sure that they were able to stay afloat. But, as Tony mentioned, technology, ended up being a huge part of the kind of ways in which we were able to assist. Businesses in the experiences space, about 17% of bookings happen online before COVID, right? And obviously the consumer shifted online. And so merchants had to start thinking, okay, I need to digitize, I need to get online quickly. We'd already had a software system that had been very effective, but we saw a huge uptick in that as people needed to digitize and automate. And I think COVID brings with itself some new challenges that technology can help, whether that's contactless payments to automating a lot of things around the workforce. So I think some of the things you were talking about with labor shortages, that's something obviously our industry has seen a lot. We were able to kind of both help automate things so that a human wasn't necessary to do it, but also think about ways in which to make the job a better job, right? So to get rid of that manual part that wasn't joyful for people, but also we introduced things like tipping, right? The average business that we work with now has 10% higher wages for their staff based on that. So I think really this is an opportunity, I think, to acknowledge that technology can do incredible things. And so certainly for us, merchants were adopting that. And with that digitization comes a whole load of new opportunities. We're connecting the world through experiences, but you can only do that when they're connected to the world. And so this great leap forward, I would say it's almost like a 10-year leap forward on digital adoption that's happened in the experiences space, and it's been very important. And I think it's going to help those merchants rebound. Already many of them have. I also think that the point about local was well made. In the US, which is where we predominantly are, we've had nearly $2 billion of bookings there. We saw that people opted to, they weren't traveling, but they were doing things locally and they were discovering things locally. And what we've seen is that there's been a huge amount of entrepreneurship. New businesses started during the pandemic, and that's happening because people are recognizing that locally people within 50 miles are willing to go and travel. Maybe they're not going on a big trip, but they're finding things to do at the weekend and taking these staycations.
And is there a tension between the experiential kind of high end, if you like, is it high end travel experience and that mass tourism that we've seen over previous decades? Tony was mentioning the issues of employment and whether there are going to be enough jobs. You kind of need the mass tourism, don't you, in order to provide those jobs? Or can the kind of business that you run provide that?
We actually have a big range. So the businesses that we work with might be seeing millions of people. And so I think that you'll see that actually, within the context of, what we consider kind of mass tourism, I think there's just much more diversity of experience now. So there are lots of new businesses being started to allow people to engage with a new place in different ways and as locals. So, suddenly there are farm experiences that kids can go to for apple picking in a local area. So I think what you're seeing is that, this period, I hope, will allow us to recognize that there's more than just 3 things to do in a destination. Actually, depending on your interests, there may be just 3 things, but they're very, very varied depending upon who we are. And I think that level of entrepreneurship that's happened, we've seen, businesses never existed. A business called Museum of Ice Cream or Color Factory in New York. These guys, aiming at getting local/travelers to come in and do something completely different to what might have existed. So I think you'll see more of that, and I think that will hopefully help us prevent, just 1 or 2 places in a destination being overcome with tourists.
President Abinader, you're going to sum up at the end for us, but just do you have questions when you lead a country that has a huge element of tourism in its economic, for its economy? Do you have questions about whether this talk is the kind of talk that's going to be beneficial for your people?
Yes, of course. I think that all the experience that I have heard here are very good for our planification and for our industry. But I want to bring my experience from the presidency and how important from our economy was tourism. I arrived at government in the middle of the pandemic in August 2020. And then we started the economic recovery. And if 16% of our GDP, it comes from tourism, and around 20% of our employees. So we said, and when we analyzed, we said, never our economy is going to recover if we don't recover tourism. So we had to have this balance between health for our people, but at the same time to open the economy. And then we started doing focus group and polls in the United States and Canada. Canada was in a complete lockdown. United States was starting to open. And then we from those focus group, we learned that people already had several months in their house. They wanted to go out. And when they showed the picture with sea and sun and so on, they say, I want to go there. But they were all afraid that if they get sick in those places. So then we started to think, we do a storm of ideas, and we came with the only COVID insurance in the world. So we had the COVID insurance that was free for anybody who came to Dominican Republic. So we got trust to the people flying to our country, and especially to the Americans.
Did that cost a lot? Was that a
yes,
big
that
burden?
cost, but at the same time, it costed more that they didn't come.
Right.
So that's what the analysis that we made.
Right.
And the insurance company was a public one, but also I have to tell you, just you know how many use it? 0.7%.
Oh, wow.
Because they had to do their tests when they go to the country. So we started working with the insurance, but at the same time we had one of the fastest vaccine programs in Latin America, and we also to the employees of the hotel we started vaccinating. We're the first one who started vaccinating.
Yeah.
And I just want to add something that you were mentioning before, that it was the time for the country to stop planning and just look for the immediate term. We decided not. And we decided even it was the time to open new destination. It was the time now to open new destination. We are opening a new destination. It's called Pedernales in the south with a beautiful beach. I am happy that the bigger companies, hotel companies in the world, starting with Marriott, already we signed an MOU so they can we develop and they manage a hotel there, and also other companies. So we have been the country that has recovered more in the world in terms of our relative terms of our population. We had the best December ever last December, but then it came Omicron.
Right.
And then we have to stop.
Right.
And then we started to recover, and then came the war.
Right.
But then we continue our efforts, our marketing. And then I was telling that April was the best April in history in tourism, and May now is going to finish the best May in history.
It's incredibly positive. And Minister Iswaran, when you mentioned in your opening remarks, I think you said you're 50% of where you were. So at this moment, with these kind of economic headwinds ahead, aside from all the other challenges we've had, is there space to think about issues like overcrowding and the environment, the kinds of things that we have been talking about up until these past few years? I mean, people are still talking about them, but you get my question.
Well, yes, I do. And I think, in a way, these challenges that coexist, they coexisted before the pandemic, and certainly in our part of the world, because you're talking about a region which is growing at a much faster rate than globally. So in terms of energy intensity, we had to do something about it. We have to do something about it, because it becomes a function of, if you don't do that, then your growth will be stymied. At the same time, we are now dealing with the fact that our trajectory has been pushed down, but now we're on the recovery. So if you ask me for an assessment, I would say that the recovery is going to be strong, and we will get back to where we were sooner rather than later. I think the big uncertainty for our part of the world in particular would be China and the Greater China region, when and how it opens up, because in terms of its share of the flows in our part of the world, it's probably somewhere in the 20-25%, so it's not insignificant. But meanwhile, the rest of Asia and, of course, the rest of the world has opened up significantly. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the growth. So when we started the year, we had prepared ourselves for at least 50% of pre-COVID volumes returning this year. But we're going to have to recalibrate that, because we can see that the growth momentum is much stronger. But what it also much stronger. But I think what it also means, though, is that the manpower issues, the supply, the resource constraints, they're also going to bite.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to say, I'm going to increase capacity by 50%, but you can't just flick the switch. You've got to bring the people back. You've got to get them trained. You've got to get your processes running. So it takes a bit of time. But these are not growing pains, but transition problems.
Yeah.
And I'm quite confident that we can overcome that.
Your Highness, clearly a country like Saudi Arabia, with its economic power, has the capability to support the industry until it can stand on its own 2 feet as well. I think the plan is for Saudi Arabia, the hope is 10% of GDP from tourism at some point. But you are invested, I suppose you could say, in the business changing, because to what extent are you hoping that Americans, Western Europeans, will fly over Paris, not go to Dubai and come to Saudi Arabia? Or to what extent actually can you rely on the enormous now demand from Southern Asia, from China?
So first of all, I think the way people travel and the reasons why people travel has changed significantly over time. People used to travel for nature, then they started traveling for culture, and then they started traveling for experiences. They travel now for lifestyle. They travel to meet the like-minded. I don't believe it's a matter anymore of the distance or why would I go from here to there. It's a matter of what is something new that I can try and that I can experience, and what different value proposition will this new destination give me in terms of enriching my experience, meeting new people, coming together on shared interests. For example, music. Music tourism is a massively growing industry, and we're seeing the numbers skyrocket for people who just travel for music. They will travel anywhere to meet the like-minded on certain types of festivities and events. And we're looking into all of those areas, and we're expanding them. And we've had over 2,000 events over the past 2 years during a pandemic. The Riyadh Season Festival, which was held at our capital, we just closed 3 months of 15 million visitors. So again, are people going to travel? It doesn't matter where they come from the world, but they will come to try something new. They will try to see something new. And we saw this in one of our destinations as well, which is called Al-Ahsa. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site for the largest palm tree oasis in the world. There were farmers, many farmers and many farms. And I went to visit them. And I saw 4 generations of farmers that were sitting there and saying exactly your point, which is we used to be farmers, now we're all about agritourism. Because we saw people coming in, experiencing, and they just wanted to live. We converted this hut, which had our supplies, into a small accommodation. People want to try the experience. They had donkeys and the entire experience. They went up palm trees, and we realized that people would travel, and they saw many foreigners that lived within the region that would travel in just to test these experiences. So again, it's how people travel, why people travel that matters, and we've seen the growth. So if the past is an indication of everything, of anything, it's the indication of the growth that's to come based on the value proposition and the offering.
Mm-hmm. And Tony, can the industry where we are right now handle that kind of growth? If that is what we're looking at, how do you keep the standards up? I have to say, I stayed at Marriott St. Regis in the Maldives in January. Fantastic.
Great hotel.
Amazing place. And they were very proud that their staff had continued to be paid, not the full wage, I don't think, through the pandemic.
That's right.
That's not been easy for everybody, though. And
No, it has not. From a demand perspective, we can absolutely continue to grow in the manner that was described. The labor piece is critical, however. We have got to do a better job as an industry to not simply put out a help wanted sign, but describe in explicit detail the sorts of careers that can be created in this industry. I know for our company, we talk with great pride. We have 8,000 hotels roughly, so 8,000 general managers. More than half of those general managers started in hourly positions. We've got to do a better job as an industry to describe those sorts of career opportunities. And whether travel retreats meaningfully from globalization or it builds on the localization we've seen over the last 2 years, we've got to build local capabilities, local knowledge. We're partnering pretty extensively in the kingdom on identifying young Saudis that have an interest in travel and tourism, and we've developed some programs that we intend to expand to grow that talent base in country. And we need to do that around the world.
Is there a tension, though, between the clear interest in, for example, avoiding overcrowding, protecting these beautiful places?
No question.
Is there a tension between that, though, and just getting the industry back to where it was? And, you know, there's an issue here, isn't there? It depends on how much money I've got to spend. And Marriott has different levels of hotel. Is that an issue? Is that a problem, or you think it's
well,
overcome?
Certainly with a 30-brand portfolio across price points, we've got the ability to satisfy a wide range of guests. But I think your first point is an interesting one. I mentioned before we sat down, I sit on the board of a nonprofit called Save Venice. And anyone that's had the privilege to visit Venice recently and seen the canals healthier than they've ever been, seen how easy it is to navigate the city, I think that city struggles. Tourism is the lifeblood of the economy. On the other hand, the local Venetians have never loved their city more. And so trying to strike that balance going forward, not just in Venice, but in destinations which have been over tourism impacted for the last number of years is a challenge that we're going to have to wrestle and continue to wrestle.
And if you, are you worried, it's almost the opposite question. How worried are you about the economic headwinds? We've been very positive so far, but we need to be a little realistic, don't we, about not just the impact of the war in Ukraine, the obvious impact, but also the broader economic implications potentially.
I mean, there's a growing chorus of voices indicating that we're headed towards a potential recession. Travel and tourism is not immune from the impacts of recession. All you need to do is look back at prior cycles. We tend to lag the recession by a quarter or two in terms of its impact. And it'll be interesting to watch this time if, in fact, we slip into a global recession, the amount of pent-up travel demand that exists globally, the amount of savings, the U.S., which is about 2/3 of Marriott's economics, there are $2 trillion in savings accounts today, and many of them being deployed for experiences as opposed to goods. And so that may mitigate a bit the impact on travel and tourism of a recession, if in fact it
If I may
occurs.
come in on that.
Yeah,
I think that it's an interesting point, but as the point was made earlier, there have been cycles in the tourism industry historically, and economic cycles have been a factor. But what we have observed time and again is that whilst I think it's not so much the volume, but the pattern of travel changes. So, for example, when you see the economic circumstances becoming a bit more challenging, people still travel, but they travel short haul, they travel in the region, they look locally, and the points made about local and the experience, I think what the pandemic has done is it has unlocked this whole new world for people.
No question.
And that's great, because what it means is now you have a wider menu, a suite of offerings. And so my own sense is the tourism industry, just from observing it over the last decade or so, it's resilient, it's able to come back. And right now we're also rebounding from the pandemic. So that may mask some of the inflation or economic recessionary kind of impact. But in the longer term, if you ask, I think the growth is there because the hunger is there and it's a function of economic growth. And your point about value versus volume, I'm not sure that's necessarily such a sharp dichotomy because, if you don't have volume, then it's very hard to talk about value anyway. I think the hotels need occupancy before they talk about high end and so on. But having said that, I think there is a case to be made that, you need to ensure the experience is a quality one because otherwise it just becomes a throng and not everyone wants that.
Which goes back to this issue on labor, right? In the U.S., we're back to about pre-pandemic level of vacant positions, 7,000, 8,000 positions. But pre-pandemic, those were likely spread relatively evenly across the country. Today, they are much more concentrated in the markets that have recovered most quickly. And so to your point, we can drive pricing power if we're delivering on that value proposition, which is challenged greatly by some of the labor shortages that we've experienced.
Ruzwana, your business depends, a large part of your business depends on the American consumer. Does looking ahead worry you? And how do smaller businesses survive these rough seas that, as you suggested, Your Excellency, actually the tourism industry often faces?
Yeah, I think in the US, one of the advantages the US has is that a lot of Americans love to travel domestically. And I think that, I do think we're heading towards a recession if we're not already in one. And I think that that means that belts will be tightened. And as people do that, I think there is still this pent-up demand to go out and do things. I think human connection matters. We like to go out and adventure and discover new things. That hasn't gone away. And if anything, the pandemic has taught us we want more of that. So I think that what we'll see is a substitution, right? People might not be going for those big trips that you were just talking about. They're going to be going close to home. I think we do have to be prepared for the idea that there may be some tightening such that some businesses will struggle a little bit. I think within the context of the US, you have this kind of growth of local, which I think we've definitely seen in a big way. I think there's also opportunity in things like business. So, one of the things we've recognized is that corporates are not going out and getting people in person anymore. Those offices are going away. Certainly in our industry and in tech, people are not going back to the office, but then there's a need to have these localized hubs. Maybe it's offsites, retreats, frankly, virtual experiences where we have businesses, large companies working with us with monthly experiences for their teams that might be more virtually orientated. So you're doing a wine tasting at home and having things sent to you. So, we definitely think
it's not quite like going to the south of France, though.
No, it isn't. It isn't, absolutely. But it's replacing actually the coffee, cooler chat, right? It's actually replacing the situation where people used to go into an office and have ways to engage, and now they don't. So don't think of it as being a replacement for travel. It's a replacement for the in-office experience. Right. So I think that market is going to be growing a lot, and we're going to see many more people trying to look for offsites and retreats so teams can meet locally, even though they might be global themselves. And so, I think we're going to see a lot of opportunity there. I think without doubt that there's going to be potential headwinds for merchants and experiences operators. But I do think that local has largely had a big substitution effect already and will continue to do so.
Have all these thoughts sparked any questions? Has anyone got something they would like to ask? If not, then that's great. We've answered all of the everything that you came, every question you came with. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's just a microphone coming over. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you very much. Do I need to do anything here? Yes. Thank you very much. I think one of the things we're benefiting in Saudi Arabia from, my name is Amr Al-Madani from the Royal Commission for Al-Ula. We have a young population, adaptive to technologies, and I think we learned that operating heritage sites, nature reserves that end up being the first to shut down, should never come at the cost of people losing their job again. So when we skill our operators, they should immediately move when things close, and they will close. Things will happen. So we have to be resilient, and this shouldn't happen again. They have to be skilled what we call double career. So when the site closes, they go into content generation, they do creating virtual. They have to have new skill set to compensate for the loss of the must see you as a visitor on site. So our resiliency plan include that element to skill people Because in the past, technology was a gap. It's hard to train somebody in the past that fast. But the adaptation level of new skill sets and acquisitions is so fast now that when you train for the next 6,000 jobs, not necessarily all of them should become rendered obsolete when the pandemic happened. I think we should be creative about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone got a question they want to ask? No? Okay. That was an important point, wasn't it? To try and be ready. But at the same time, of course, for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, there is an economic element to this. You need this to work, or you very much want this to work.
We want this to work. I think we're very clear on our ambitions and our goals, and we're really working hard towards it, and we're achieving a lot. But that point on jobs is on point, because what we're doing now is we wanted to leverage the pandemic and to get people skilled and trained in order to be ready for when these jobs come again, and they're going to come quickly. How can you train people when it's on lockdown or when all of these things are happening? We quickly had to find solutions to create e-training programs for people to get that basic skill set that they need. We actually started even training barista. We had barista programs where they just needed their coffee machine. They would buy their coffee machine. They teach like 30 other people how to do it. And we actually managed to train over 110,000 people in 2021 alone. So it's absolutely critical to get the right skill set ready for the jobs that are going to come quickly.
Okay.
The power of technology is to also hopefully make it easier for people to do their jobs, you know? So this kind of, we talk about reskilling, but I think, you know, the automation and ways in which we can kind of lower the needs. You know, Uber's a great example. I'm from the UK. London taxi drivers needed to know the entire city, right? And that took years to learn. And now with a smartphone and GPS, anyone can go and help people get from A to B. So I do think we should leverage the opportunity that technology gives us in order to enable and allow people to be more skilled than they might otherwise have been.
Although I think for our business, when we talk about the adoption of technology, often the question we get is, great, how many jobs will that allow you to eliminate, and how much will that allow you to expand margins? Certainly, we consistently look for operating efficiencies, but one of the things technology, we believe, does is it enables our associates to be more engaged with the guest. They've chosen a career in service. They don't want to be head down banging away on a keyboard. They want to be looking the guest in the eye, engaging with that guest, and we think technology is a great enabler.
President Abinader, to give you the last minute of thoughts, from what you've heard, as a leader of a country which depends so much on tourism, has given you hope? What has given you concern, and what kind of conclusions do you draw?
I think both. There is concern, but I think here also they spoke about regional travel. I think that you will see in the next 18 months a lot of regional travel. You will not see transatlantic, you will not see trans-Pacific. For example, we have seen an excellent summer for us, especially from the Americans, because they will travel less to Europe, because of the concerns that they have. And at the beginning also of we wanted to open hotels that were closed. We started financing for our own Dominicans without interest to go to the hotels, because they had to open. So we had to be prepared for the summer, for the winter of 2020, 2021, that they were going to open half the hotels. And the tourism, Dominican tourism, which was 8%, it climbed it to 30%. And it helped us also to open the hotels from and to expect when the tourists came. But also Dominicans, we have 2 million Dominicans living in the United States, they were the first also to came as tourists to Dominican Republic. So they're regional, specific, and looking for a special interest on the local markets. You will see a whole matrix of possibilities. Now we are seeing also on the younger generations the ecotourism. I mean, all the younger generation, They want to go to a hotel and they want to go, if that hotel uses plastic, or if that hotel has an organic restaurant. And that's also, I think that everyone knows it's a market that is growing. But also the typical market of sea and sun and beach is also there. But they are looking that if they go to one of our beach in Dominican Republic, they also want to go to Santo Domingo, which is the first city in America, where you have one of the biggest colonial city in the whole America. But they wanted also to go to an ecological park, and they go there to the ecological park, and you have to have all these several markets, because that's what people are looking. People are looking, as they describe here, for several type of interests on ecological, on cultural, on historic. So everything that I've said here, it's hopes, but at the same time, we are living in a world that you cannot plan ahead. There is concern. There is concern, and we have to plan on a time of uncertainty.
I think that's a great summary, because it pretty much sums up the complexity of the business that you're all working in. I have to say, whenever I talk to you guys, I'm just incredibly impressed by how you manage to ride out these changing expectations from your consumers, and let's hope that you continue to go from strength to strength. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.